These are Meze's gorgeous Rai Penta in-ear monitors. But do they give you an in-ear version of their flagship Empyrean headphones? Let's find out. Designed and engineered in Romania. So we have quad BA and dynamic. Sounds good. Yeah, 20 ohm impedance. I actually prefer higher impedance IEMs like the RE2000s are easier to drive. Lower impedance are actually harder. I notice more difference if you're going from a low to a high-end DAP if I use low impedance IEMs, but less if I'm using high impedance IEMs. And you think that's the opposite of logical, but impedance affects voltage, not current. And lower impedance requires greater current. So, looks like we have a series of tips. This is interesting. I think looks like you might be able to tune them by using it with different bore widths. That will be interesting to play with. So on the back, we've got foamies as well. Now these are biflange, it appears. So the rest of this bore sizes, so there's a bit of tunability in there. The IEMs themselves, let's have a look. Well, this is interesting. The flange is fairly far down the nozzle. They've got nice, they're attractive, that's for certain. A nicely embedded MMCX socket in there. And it looks like we have maybe a couple of holes for, oh, this is familiar from the Empyrean, a couple of holes for a couple of ports, and a very clear R is on there. Looks good. And a case. This is I like funky shape. Nice to have originality, not just a generic case. Although, in a sense, it is, fairly typical style case, I guess. And we have an attractive looking cable with Meze on it. Now I've got a balance cable they've also sent me, so I'll check that out as well. Looks like they're going for the nice splitter and something like a fairly typical braided cable. This kind of braid apparently has got the best sonic properties. Don't ask me about cables, it's kind of a bit beyond me, but apparently the braiding affects it, how tightly it's twisted and all that. I'll leave that up to people who do that kind of thing. Airline adapter, although airline quality music is kind of crap. And good. And underneath, more stickers. And a big chunk of foam. So that's it. Could have used a smaller box maybe, but let's get into listening. The Rai Pentas have been described as a mini Empyrean in a sense, and they're probably fairly on the mark. I mean, the Empyreans, if you saw my video, are fairly darker sounding headphones. A lot of high-end headphones tend to be brighter sounding, like the Utopias. They are kind of thicker, stronger bass and a bit less treble, although I found a bit not quite enough treble for my tastes unless I did put on an aftermarket cable. These are kind of heading in that direction with their sound signature. You have the strong dynamic driver bass in there, which may be a little bit too much for some tastes. The mid-range was pretty excellent, and the treble, well, it's balanced armature treble, which it's not as sophisticated and clear sounding as some of these other IEMs, like Solaris, for example, and these electric, especially not anything like the electric drivers you can get in AME Customs and other IEMs nowadays, but still fairly balanced and even overall with a fair bass tilt. And that made them pretty good all-rounders with a lot of music. Just starting with my good old number 82 playlist, the good old Jeff Beck, and that's kind of an old-school rock track. Guitar is the focus on there as well as the vocals. And the guitar is the focus there, and with a lot of other tracks I listen to, the vocals are the focus. And with that doesn't have as much bass as modern music does, but the bass was filled in nicely by the dynamic driver here, and that may be filled in a bit too much for some tastes who prefer, a lot of people prefer lighter sounding IEMs. So the mid-range, though, was really excellent, and it really brought out the guitar really nicely. The treble being, as I said, balanced armature, it wasn't as good, clear sounding as some of the other IEMs I've had here, examples given. For example, the cymbals, they didn't come through that kind of openness and clarity as you get, say, with especially the electric treble in these AME customs, or even the Solaris. And even if I put on wider bore tips, now IEMs can be tuned, of course, with dynamic drivers, usually tuned to some degree. With a narrower bore tip, you get more bass, and tending to put on something wider bore, for example, these good old JVC spiral dots, which I've showed in many of my other videos, that usually reduces the bass a bit to bring out the treble a bit more. With these, the interesting thing was the amount of tunability was fairly limited. It tended to reduce the very low bass, putting on these spiral dots, but not so much the rest of the sound signature. It didn't change it that dramatically. These spiral dots are, incidentally, just so if you haven't seen them before, have spirals of dots in there which prevent resonances that can distort the sound or cause distortion of the sound from the tip. Obviously, you can see the flange on here is very kind of long, so they go very far up these tips. They don't leave much kind of space for the sound to bounce off anything. And last I was listening through, even there isn't a dramatic amount of difference even compared to these much longer bore biflange tips. More stuff for the sound to bounce off. Narrower bore, one would expect to make a dramatic difference, and it didn't make a huge amount of difference, nor did the stock tips, which even have a narrower bore. So trying to bring out better treble out of these just didn't really kind of happen that much with the good old Jeff Beck. And, I preferred, in terms of treble, I preferred the kind of more open sound of these two pairs of IEMs. With other stuff, again, the deep bass rumble, well, it came through on my good old usual test track, the new basement tapes, more so with, of course, things like the biflange and narrower bore tips, and only a fraction less, as I said, with these things like these spiral dots. So the sound signature actually stayed fairly consistent. There was a little bit of tuning that could be done with the cable, of course, but I tried a Solaris cable on them and it made subtle differences. But otherwise, the IEM stayed fairly consistent. In terms of clarity, they didn't have quite the clarity of, say, again, higher-end stuff like the Solaris. Now, the Solaris, of course, is best with live music and live presentation. That's where it excels and is absolutely excellent. Especially, and you can see it's got spiral dots on there too at the moment. Very open and clear, and especially and things like the electric drivers, AME customs do have very, very open and clear treble, which is superior to regular typical balanced armature treble. So they're $1,000. These are a few $100s more, and so you do get doesn't quite reach up to the more expensive and more sophisticated designs that are out there. The other place that was interesting that it was challenged was it didn't sound perfectly clear, like the delineation of instruments, and you don't really have a sound stage with IEMs, but the kind of clarity was a little bit lacking. It was a bit behind these others, which are, albeit, especially the Solaris in this setup, somewhat brighter. In the bass too, it's kind of challenged by IEMs at half the price in the case of these FH7s, which have, technically very sophisticated bass setup. But with the FH7s are kind of weird IEM in that they have very strong low bass, and then there's very forward mids, and then there's bright treble, it kind of sounds a little bit wonky for some people, a little bit weird for some people. Some people found the mids too far forward. The bass is kind of a little bit weird. The Rai Pentas are a more kind of conventional kind of setup where there's a smoother transition between the bass, mids, and treble. And that was kind of interesting overall because the Rai Pentas, they're more kind of even, consistent sounding through the range. These have more sophisticated bass. Both of these, Solaris and AME Customs, have more sophisticated treble. And so I think a lot of people you might consider will go, well, should I spend a few $100s more to get the better treble of these, or should I just save my money and get the better bass of these, where the treble is not going to be any really worse, although the sound is a bit kind of odd. And in the end, here's the thing: I'm sitting at my desk, I'm listening with these IEMs, and I get the full effect of with all the equipment I have here, the full effect that they can give. These didn't really, these scale up to the Hugo 2, these scale up to the Hugo 2, these actually did too to some degree. These don't really scale up a great degree. I wouldn't bother personally using much more than a Mojo, or I've got the good old M11 sitting here. And, for me, I just thought, that kind of mid, fairly, well, it's funny that we call something as good as this mid-range now. Kind of gear, and that was fine. And the thing is, that's if I'm listening at my desk, of course I might pick something like this, but if I'm going to be buying IEMs, I'm going to be using them on public transport. And here's something that people don't consider. On public transport, when I listen with, as a plane or a train, I'm listening with these very bright, much brighter IEMs. The effect that I get is that the treble just sounds harsh. And I think it's some kind of distortion caused by, is it intermodulation distortion? I'm not quite sure the best way to describe it, but the interference of the background sounds around me, like plane noise or train noise or people, whatever, interferes with the treble enough that the brighter sounding IEMs just sound harsh and unpleasant. It's like a kind of distortion. So now when I go on a plane, if I take IEMs, as well as taking foam tips or biflange to isolate as much noise as possible, I will tend to go for darker sounding IEMs. And these are a little bit darker sounding. And the clarity that these can give, I just won't get when I'm on a plane or a train. The interference from the outside sounds will be too much. I'm not going to be listening to people sitting in the back of the studio, shifting in their chair while in between notes of the singer, which you can hear with this stuff. It just won't be an issue. I'll be more likely to be listening to a random playlist for which this kind of sound signature will work really, really well, and it doesn't have too much treble that it will sound harsh and unpleasant with any interference of background sounds. So while I think they're not as... And likewise, I might just use them with the good old iPhone dongle because, the extra clarity of carrying around an extra heavy brick with me of some kind isn't, I'm not going to really notice. So I might not, but they drove fine out of here, even if I did get a better result out of the M11 or the Mojo. So as things go, like if I was to buy a pair of high-end IEMs to actually use for travel, I would probably be more inclined to buy something like the Rai Pentas because that kind of sound signature, if I'm listening, whatever music comes on, I can enjoy listening to it. Whereas the others, it's kind of like, well, this works really with live music, but some modern music, which is a bit harsher, maybe is a bit too bright and piercing for, and again, issues as described. These, well, I've discussed those in the AME custom video. I don't think I'll get, the clarity just might not come out on a plane or train, although I've yet to try the dynamic driver ones, and see how much bass punch they have. With just, when I just started listening with these in the morning for, preparing for the review, I just found them enjoyable. And that's the key thing. I just enjoyed listening. And they're, again, not the most clear, not the most sophisticated, but for just pure, straightforward enjoyment, like the Empyreans, which is why I chose the Empyreans as one of my main pair of headphones. I knew that whatever music I listen to, I can just simply enjoy it. And, a lot of it is just stuff that needs a good bass kick. And these provide that. So that's kind of the Rai Pentas for me. They're a bit challenged in many respects for sophistication and clarity and value. But for just sheer, simple entertainment value, I could imagine people just for taking where IEMs are supposed to be used for portability, they're just, really enjoyable. And I didn't bother. The cable on them is thin and portable. I mean, some places sell really thick, crazy cables. I just tried a Solaris cable on them and a couple others. I didn't really find it made enough difference for me to really care so much. Shifted, you get a bit of fine tuning in there, and I call them, most cables are kind of very expensive fine tuning for me. If you were buying like a $4,000 pair of IEMs, which were absolutely amazing, and where spending a few $100s on a cable might be considered reasonable, if you can be considered reasonable at all, then they might do that. But here, I just stock as they were, I just find them fine, and they at least provide some sophistication with this nice rhodium plug. So I also have this is the other one I used for balanced, which is the one they sent. So as things go, the Rai Pentas are a good all-round entertaining IEM. Not the most sophisticated in many respects, maybe not the best value either, but they're just easy to enjoy a lot of music with. And as long as you don't mind, as long as you don't have an issue with a fair amount of bass being in there, then if you're listening to a very eclectic mix of music, then these are just very enjoyable. So that's what I reckon about the Rai Pentas. So if you have any questions, comments, or you'd like some more information about the music I listen to, please leave them below. And constructive criticism is also welcome. Did I forget anything? Do you own a pair of Rai Pentas? Do you find something different from what did it match my description of them? Did you experience something different? Or any tips? tips, that's pun not intended, you can give about that, post them in the comments below. Before you go, don't forget that these videos are supported by people such as yourself. If you'd like to join our community of like-minded enthusiasts, in exchange you can get access to my advice anytime, which, considering you'll probably spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on equipment, could save you a lot of money. Also, I have monthly draws for free gear and music discounts available as well. But most importantly, you'll be helping me make these videos. So for that and more, head over to amos.io/join and choose a membership option. Thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you online.